I love Vladimir Tarasenko. I think it was a great move by the New York Rangers adding him at the trade deadline. And then, having Patrick Kane fall in their lap. And you look at the Rangers and the talent that they added going into this offseason and going into at the trade deadline. The Rangers are built to win a Stanley Cup. And a lot of people, including yours and your team over there, Forever Blueshirts, believe that this team is Stanley Cup ready. When you look at this team and you look at the comparisons of the 94 team that won a Stanley Cup, what could you compare to that team, to this team, where they can go all the way to the Stanley Cup finals and win?
That's kind of difficult. That's difficult. I mean, every championship team is different, right? So they all have different mixes and whatnot. And you're talking a completely different era of hockey, right? I mean, Brian Leetch, Adam Fox is one comparison. To a lesser degree, maybe Mark Messier, Mika Zibanejad. And I only say a lesser degree because how do you compare, even though Mika Zibanejad is a two-way center, right? Excellent player. Mark Messier is a Hall of Famer, one of the all-time great players of the game, and just was incredible, right? But, what he could get away with back then, players can't get away with today, right? So it's a little bit different. I think the Rangers probably have better forwards than that Stanley Cup team. I think that Stanley Cup team was literally built for a long playoff run. I mean, they almost overturned the roster. You can, literally, Tony, two top six forwards were traded. That's unheard of. Tony Amonte and Mike Gardner, two top six forwards. I'm taking them out of my lineup, and I'm going to replace them with Glenn Anderson, who's not as good as either one of those two guys I just mentioned, right? And it's just and then Tony Amonte had an incredible career in Chicago. You got Stefan Matteau and Brian Noonan, right? Just loaded up with big-bodied, heavy players who will grind you to death. And it did work out because, hey, Matteau scored one of the most famous goals in Rangers history in double overtime against Martin Brodeur to send them to the finals, right? So it's hard to look and say, yeah, that there's comparisons. It's probably easier for me to say it after the fact and go, you know what?
I think you could compare them. If you
Fox and Leetch are easy, Shesterkin and Richter,
but
maybe.
you have the size too. Adding Nico Mikola, he's a big body defenseman that they added, kind of like Jeff Bukaboom, a guy that can do those kind of things. Jacob Trouba, another mean guy who can hit, pretty big defenseman. I mean, the Rangers aren't a small team; they're big. Even Chris Kreider. Big. Chris Kreider's a big guy too.
I actually compared him to Adam Graves a little bit.
Yeah,
right? When that was that was a comparison. I said,
I think that year he had what? Did Adam Graves have 40 goals that year when they went to the Stanley Cup?
52.
So I mean, when you look at the 94 Rangers, you look at even the trade, bringing in a big time player from the Chicago Blackhawks. You brought in Steve Larmer. And Steve Larmer was a big part of that playoff run. Everybody keeps talking about Esa Tikkanen and Stefan Matteau. People forget about what Steve Larmer did. He was a two-way player, great hitter, one of the better players on the Chicago Blackhawks on that time. So you look at bringing in Patrick Kane, probably the best player on the Chicago Blackhawks throughout the last 3-4 years, or probably last 10 years, and then you bring in Steve Larmer. There's a lot of comparisons to this Ranger team and the 94 Rangers. That doesn't mean that the Rangers are going to win this year. I don't think they're going to, but I do believe they're going to make a long playoff run because of the talent that they have.
East is an absolute buzzsaw. I mean, it's just it's an absolute buzzsaw. There's no ways around it. But and again, as good as the Devils had this season, and I think they were good. There's still a lot of question marks. I still think it's funny. The Devils were very similar to the Rangers last year, as I think they caught a lot of teams by surprise with how good they were this year. And I think that buoyed them to their 112-point record. I think that helped, right? Because if you can catch a couple of teams that you maybe still, even when you get later in the season, it's like, okay. But now it's the playoffs, and the Rangers obviously have the bitter taste of what happened to them last year. The question for the Rangers this year, did they learn their lesson?